The twin sons of Sin, 9 hung high in the sky, casting long shadows across the dusty market square, where the slave auctions were in full swing. Alien traders called out in harsh, guttural tones, their voices mixing with the buzzing of the crowd. Among the cages was Avira, a slender young woman with shimmering emerald skin and eyes that sparkled like stars. She was not human, but her fate would become tied with the future of humanity. Avira had once lived in comfort on her home planet, Laris Prime. Her life was filled with beauty, culture, and art, but everything changed when her mother died. Her stepmother, cold and calculating, saw Avira not as family, but as a means to settle her debts. Sold like livestock to pay off gambling losses, Avira was dragged into the galaxy's darkest corners, now just another captive on an alien world. She felt fear creeping into her heart, unsure of her future, as the crowd burst into a frenzy of bids. From her cell, Avira's gaze followed a tall figure moving through the crowd. He was different, a human. His eyes were sharp, scanning the auction with cool precision. His military jacket was worn, hinting at battles long fought and a past filled with danger. His name was Captain Ryker, and he had come to this forsaken planet, Kultra N9, for supplies. His ship, the Horizon, was docked at the far edge of the marketplace. But something else caught his eye, Avira. There was something defiant in her, something that intrigued him. Though she was gaunt from malnutrition and captivity, her spirit was unbroken. Her eyes, though filled with fear, held a silent cry for freedom. Ryker placed his bid, and after a few tense moments, the deal was struck. Avira was pulled from her cage and handed over to him. Her heart sank, realizing she was merely being passed from one master to another. But Ryker was different. He didn't treat her like property. He asked her name, where she was from, and how she ended up in such a terrible place. Avira was slow to trust, but over time, aboard the Horizon, she realized that Ryker's motives were not like those of a typical slaver. He wasn't interested in owning people, he freed them. Ryker and his crew, a diverse group of humans and aliens, were rebels, liberating those oppressed by tyrannical forces across the galaxy. As the Horizon left the planet behind, Avira felt her chains begin to loosen, but her journey was far from over. Life aboard the ship was lively and full of purpose. She quickly found her place in the medical bay, working alongside Dr. Sarek, an alien physician with 6 arms and a sharp sense of humor. Here, Avira discovered the resilience of the human spirit and the camaraderie that bound Ryker's crew together. They were united in their fight for freedom. Weeks passed, and Avira and Ryker grew closer. He admired her strength and sharp mind, while she found herself drawn to his quiet sense of justice and vulnerability. One evening, Ryker opened up to her, sharing stories of his past in the Terran Defense Corps, where he had fought in the brutal human-alien wars. The battles had left him scarred, both physically and emotionally, and he had abandoned the military to fight for a higher cause, freedom for all, regardless of race or species. Their conversation was cut short by an urgent distress call. A small colony on the edge of the galaxy was under siege by raiders. Without hesitation, Ryker ordered the ship to change course. As the Horizon hurtled through space, Avira prepared for battle alongside the crew. Though she had never fought before, this was her chance to fight for the freedom she had long yearned for. When the ship arrived, the colony was in chaos. Fires raged through the streets, and explosions shook the ground. Raiders, vicious mercenaries, were pillaging everything in sight. Avira stood on the bridge beside Ryker, her heart pounding. The colony's defenses were crumbling under the raiders' onslaught, led by their brutal warlord, Skarn. "We're going down there," Ryker declared, gearing up for battle. Avira felt a wave of fear, but refused to back down. She grabbed his arm and said firmly, "I'm coming with you." Together, they descended into the heart of the burning colony. The air was thick with smoke, and the sounds of battle were deafening. As they moved through the ruins, Ryker's crew engaged the raiders in fierce combat. Avira, armed with a plasma pistol Ryker had given her, fought with determination, her fear fueling her desire to survive. Their goal was clear: Skarn had taken hostages in the colony's main hub, and they had to stop him. The massive warlord, clad in spiked armor with glowing red eyes, was a terrifying sight. As they approached, Ryker gave Avira a quick, intense look. "We need to take him down." The battle that followed was brutal. Skarn's hammer crashed through buildings with deadly force, and Avira narrowly escaped a blow that would have killed her. Ryker fired at Skarn, but the warlord's armor absorbed the shots. "Aim for the joints!" Ryker shouted over the din of battle. With a steady hand, Avira targeted the weak points in Skarn's armor. Her shots hit their mark, and Skarn roared in pain as his movement slowed. But even wounded, he was deadly. In a final, desperate moment, Avira spotted a small gap in his chest armor and took her shot. The plasma bolt flew straight and true, striking the weak point and causing Skarn's armor to explode. The warlord fell, defeated. The battle was over, but the cost was high. The colony lay in ruins, but the survivors were safe, thanks to Ryker and his crew. As Avira stood beside Ryker, looking out over the smoldering wreckage, she knew that this was just the beginning of their journey. There were still many battles ahead, but she would face them all with Ryker at her side. The aftermath of the battle weighed heavily on Avira's shoulders as she walked through the ravaged colony. Smoke still drifted through the air, and the ground was littered with debris from the brutal fight. The surviving colonists huddled together, their faces etched with exhaustion and fear, but they were alive. The Horizon's crew worked quickly to provide aid, tending to the wounded and organizing the remaining supplies. Ryker stood nearby, giving orders with a calm authority that belied the chaos around them. He glanced at Avira, his eyes softening for a moment as they met hers. "You did well out there," he said quietly. Avira swallowed, still shaken from the battle. The memory of Skarn's hulking figure charging toward her, hammer raised for a final blow, played over and over in her mind. But Ryker's praise gave her strength. "We survived," she replied, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. "More than that," Ryker said, his voice low. "You saved lives today." The weight of his words settled over her. She had never imagined herself in the middle of a battle, let alone being the one to deliver the final blow to a warlord like Skarn. The reality of it felt surreal, but there was no time to dwell on her thoughts. The colonists needed help, and there was much to do. Ryker turned to Sarik, the ship's medic. "What's the status on the wounded?" Sarik, his 6 arms moving swiftly as he treated a badly injured colonist, responded without looking up. "We've stabilized most of them, but supplies are running low. If we don't get them to a medical station soon, we'll lose a few." Ryker frowned, glancing at the colony's crumbling infrastructure. "We'll take the worst cases back to the ship. We got a med bay there, and I'll send out a distress signal to nearby sectors for aid." Avira stepped forward. "I can help Sarik get the injured aboard," she offered, eager to prove herself useful beyond the battlefield. Sarik glanced up at her with one of his many eyes and nodded. "Good. We could use the extra hands." As the team moved swiftly to transport the injured to the Horizon, Avira's thoughts drifted to her stepmother, the one who had sold her into this life. It was hard to reconcile the woman she had once called family with the cold, calculating gambler who had betrayed her. Avira's life before captivity felt like a distant dream now, and the galaxy was a much darker place than she had ever imagined. Once the injured were safely aboard, Avira joined Ryker in the ship's control room. The tension in the air was palpable as they prepared to leave the colony. On the large view screen, the damage to the settlement was clear. Smoke billowed from ruined buildings, and the once bustling streets were now silent. "They'll rebuild," Ryker said, his voice softer now, as if reading her thoughts. "They don't have much left," Avira replied, her eyes fixed on the screen. "Not after what the Raiders did." Ryker gave a grim nod. "No, they don't. But humans are resilient, just like you." She turned to him, his words sinking in. "I'm not human." He smiled faintly. "No, but you've got the same fire. The same will to survive and fight back. That counts for something." Avira opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, the ship's communications system crackled to life. "Rook," the ship's pilot, spoke up. "Captain, we got incoming." Riker's expression hardened as he stepped toward the control panel. What is it? Unidentified ships, heading straight for us. Fast. The screen shifted to display the approaching vessels. Avira's heart dropped at the sight. 3 sleek, heavily armed ships cutting through space toward them. Pirates? She asked, her voice tight. Ryker narrowed his eyes. No. Worse. That's a syndicate emblem on their hulls. Looks like Skarn's death hasn't gone unnoticed. The Syndicate, a powerful and ruthless organization that controlled much of the galaxy's underworld. If they were after the Horizon, it meant only one thing. They wanted revenge for Skarn. Avira felt a chill run down her spine. Prepare for evasive maneuvers, Ryker ordered, his voice sharp now. We can't fight them head-on, not in this condition. The crew sprang into action. Avira moved to her station, her mind racing. This wasn't the first time they had faced danger, but something about this felt different. The Syndicate didn't just attack, they pursued relentlessly. And if they were targeting the Horizon, they wouldn't stop until Ryker and his crew were either captured or dead. We need to jump to hyperspace, Rook said, his hands flying over the controls. But they're closing in fast. We might not make it. Ryker clenched his jaw, eyes scanning the screen for any advantage. Divert all power to shields. We need to buy time. Avira watched as the Syndicate ships drew closer, her pulse quickening. The tension was thick as the crew worked in perfect synchronization, but the Syndicate wasn't slowing down. Time was running out. Suddenly, the ship lurched violently as the first blast from the Syndicate ship struck their shields. Alarms blared throughout the control room, and Avira gripped the edge of her console to steady herself. Shields holding, but not for long. Sarek's voice crackled over the comms from the med bay. Ryker cursed under his breath. We need that jump, Rook. I'm working on it. Rook snapped, his fingers flying faster across the controls. Another blast rocked the ship, sending sparks flying from the overhead panels. Avira's heart pounded in her chest. This couldn't be how it ended. Not after everything they had just survived. Then, just as the Syndicate ships closed in for what looked like a final blow, Rook yelled, "Got it." Hyperspace jump initiated. The stars outside the viewport stretched into long streaks of light as the Horizon shot into hyperspace, narrowly escaping the Syndicate's grasp. The control room went silent for a moment, the crew collectively holding their breath as the ship stabilized. Ryker exhaled, leaning back against the control panel. That was too close. Avira, still gripping the edge of her console, nodded in agreement. What now? She asked, her voice quieter than she intended. We regroup, Ryker replied. But this isn't over. The Syndicate will come after us again, and next time, they'll be ready. Avira felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She knew he was right. The Syndicate would stop at nothing to avenge their fallen warlord. And now, they had marked the Horizon and its crew as targets. But as she stood there, catching her breath, she also knew one thing for certain. She wouldn't back down. Not now. Not ever. She had come too far, fought too hard, and found something worth fighting for. And whatever the galaxy threw at her next, she would be ready. Avira stared out of the observation deck's viewport, watching the swirling chaos of hyperspace beyond the glass. The streaks of starlight blurred into a dizzying pattern, a reflection of the confusion storming inside her. They had barely escaped the Syndicate ships, and she knew the reprieve wouldn't last. The crew was busy repairing damage, tending to the wounded, and preparing for whatever came next, but for Avira, the deeper threat was more personal. Riker's voice echoed in her head. The Syndicate will come after us again. The Syndicate. Their reach extended far across the galaxy, into places she had once thought safe. But the truth was there was no safe haven. Not for her, not for the crew of the Horizon, and certainly not for Ryker, whose calm exterior masked a man who had already faced too many battles. A soft chime signaled someone's approach. Avira turned, half expecting Ryker, but instead saw Ilian, one of the ship's engineers. His dark eyes were intense, and his usual playful demeanor was absent. "Captain wants you in the war room," he said, his voice rough with exhaustion. "We're planning our next move." She nodded and followed him through the narrow corridors, past crew members rushing to repair the damage from the Syndicate's attack. The ship still hummed with life, despite the tension, despite the danger. This place was becoming her home in a way she hadn't anticipated, and the people here, humans and aliens alike, felt like the closest thing she had to a family. When they reached the war room, Avira stepped inside to find Ryker standing at the hollow table, deep in conversation with Sarek and Rook. The display projected a map of the sector, several points flashing red, indicating hostile territories. Ryker looked up as she entered, his sharp gaze softening when it landed on her. "We need to talk." Avira crossed the room, stopping beside him. The sight of the galaxy stretched out in front of them felt daunting. Every star, every planet, seemed to pulse with hidden threats. "What's our plan?" Rook leaned over the table, arms crossed, his expression grim. "We're running out of places to hide. The syndicate's got eyes everywhere, and they put a bounty on Ryker's head. Anyone looking to make a quick fortune will be hunting us down. Bounty hunters, pirates, slavers, it's just a matter of time before they catch up," Sarek added, his multiple arms moving with restless energy. Ryker rubbed the back of his neck, a familiar gesture that Avira had come to recognize as frustration. "We need to get off the syndicate's radar. At least long enough to regroup and figure out our next move." Avira's heart sank. She had expected danger, but this? They were being hunted across the stars. "Where can we go?" Ryker pointed to a distant part of the map. "There's an old smuggler's outpost on the edge of the Neater system. It's off the grid, not well known, and definitely not friendly to the syndicate. We can lie low there, repair the ship, and get supplies." Rook snorted. "If we're lucky. That place is crawling with scum, and no one's going to offer help without a price." "We'll have to make it work," Ryker said, his voice hard. "I'm not going to wait around for the syndicate to catch up." Avira studied the map, the blinking star representing the outpost. A small, hidden world in a lawless corner of the galaxy. It wasn't ideal, but it was their only option. "How long will it take us to get there?" "We'll arrive by tomorrow," Rook answered. "Assuming we don't run into more trouble on the way." Ryker turned to Avira. "I need you with me when we land. The syndicate may be after all of us, but you're a bigger target now. Skarn wasn't just some warlord. He had connections. Powerful ones." Avira felt a cold weight settle in her chest. "Connections?" Riker's eyes darkened. "Before you killed him, Skarn wasn't just running his own operations. He was working for someone higher up in the syndicate, a figure we don't have much intel on, but we know they're dangerous. Killing Skarn put you in their crosshairs." Avira clenched her fists, anger rising to the surface. "I didn't have a choice. You would have killed us all." Ryker nodded, his gaze steady. "You did what you had to. But now, the consequences are catching up." The room fell silent for a moment, the reality of their situation settling over them. Sarek broke the quiet, his voice surprisingly gentle. "We'll figure it out, Avira. We always do." She forced a tight smile. "I know." Riker's hand found her shoulder, his touch reassuring. "We'll get through this. Together." Avira met his gaze, seeing the weariness hidden behind his confidence. She knew he was carrying the weight of the entire crew on his shoulders, just as she carried the burden of her past. But there was no time to dwell on old wounds. They had to survive first. The meeting broke up, and the crew returned to their duties. Avira followed Ryker out of the war room, her mind spinning with the revelations. Skarn's death had unleashed a new wave of threats, and the syndicate wouldn't rest until they had their revenge. But more than that, there was something else, something lurking in the shadows of her past that she hadn't fully confronted. As they walked through the narrow corridors, Ryker glanced at her. "You've been quiet." "I've just been thinking," she replied softly. "About the past. About what's next." Riker's expression darkened. "Your stepmother?" Avira nodded. "I can't stop thinking about how she sold me. I still don't understand how she could do it." Ryker stopped and turned to face her. "People like that don't care about others. They only see what they can gain." "Maybe," Avira said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I want answers." Ryker studied her for a long moment before speaking. "We'll find them. But first we survive this." They stood in silence for a moment longer before Ryker squeezed her shoulder and walked away, leaving Avira alone in the corridor. The ship hummed around her, the familiar sounds of life aboard the horizon bringing some measure of comfort. But deep down, she knew Ryker was right. They had to survive first, and survival in this galaxy meant facing not only the dangers of the present, but the ghosts of the past that still haunted them. As Avira turned toward her quarters, the thoughts of her stepmother and the looming syndicate threat weighed heavily on her mind. She could feel the tides shifting around her, and the path ahead was growing darker. The answer she sought might be closer than she realized. But would they come at a price she was willing to pay?